Welcome to another tutorial on FortiGate Firewall. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can configure your reverse proxy using the Squid package manager that you can download from the package manager on PFsense. And I'm using PFsense 2.6 version. And I'll show you the package that I have installed for the Squid proxy. Click on System, go to Package Manager. And you can click on available packages and you can type in and search for Squid. I have already installed the package, so it is coming inside the install packages tab. So once you have the package installed, you can click on services and go to Squid proxy server and you can enable this Squid proxy. Once you have the Squid proxy enabled, you can go back to the Squid reverse proxy configuration and set it up. Well, before starting, let me give you an overview of my network and how I have configured the reverse proxy in my network, which is pretty simple. So I have two interfaces. One is WAN, other one is LAN. WAN is having a public IP 14.140.40.129. LAN is having an internal IP 192.168.0.129, which is actually connected to the internal server. Let me share the diagram. Okay, so this is the diagram. As you can see, so the client is connected to the PFsense firewall via internet, and the server that is actually fetching the information is behind the PFsense firewall, which is behind the LAN interface, server 1, with an IP address 192.168.0.248, and server 2 with an IP address of 192.168.0.100, and both of them are reachable over this particular domain, orchestra.summit.com and nas.summit.com. And the proxy port that is configured on PFsense Firewall for HTTP 1111, for HTTPS 1112, and the external port, which is the WAN port, is having the IP address 14.140.40.129. And just like the for proxy, where you try to hide the identity of the client, in reverse proxy, client will not know who is actually fetching the information. And beside this particular advantage, you have other facilities as well, like load balancing, logging, and there are various advantages of reverse proxy as well as the for proxy. So this is the WAN port 14.140.40.129, and the LAN port is connecting to both the servers. And whenever you type in orchestra.summit.com, it should basically resolve to this public external IP on PFsense Firewall 14.140.40.129 instead of resolving to this particular IP. For simplicity, I've taken it as a private IP, but it could be a public IP configuration as well. And similarly, nas.summit.com will resolve to 14.140.40.129, and it is actually the configuration on the PFSense firewall which will decide where to map that particular request from the client. So we'll see that in some time in the configuration. So now we have the network scenario. Let's go back to the services, Squid reverse proxy. In general tab, you will have to select the IP version. In my case, it is IPv4. And the reverse proxy interface, well, WAN is the interface which is listening for all the requests from the client as shown in the previous diagram. So I've selected WAN here. Coming down to the external FQTN, well, this is the external fully qualified domain name of the WAN IP address. So your WAN IP address, how do you resolve this particular WAN IP address, which is this one? So you will have to define the FQDN here. I have internal setup. And this is how I resolve my WAN IP address. Click this option. By default, it is enabled. If checked, the reverse proxy will reset the TCP connection if the request is unauthorized. And then coming down to the HTTP setting, if you select this option, you will have to enter the HTTP port. And if you would like to go for the standard port, then you will have to change the tunnel tunables, I think system tunable, and then after that you should be able to do so. So if you try to use the standard port, which is for the HTTP, and if you try to save it, it will throw an error, which is basically because of this particular settings. But then if you go to system, advanced system tunable, and then set this particular value here, then you should be able to use the standard port. But in my case, I'll go with a custom port, which is 1111. That's it. I'm not putting in the reverse HTTP default site. Then coming down to HTTPS settings, click here to enable it. Enter the HTTP port 1112. And you will have to select the certificate. I already have some of the certificates uploaded. So I'm going with the proxy one, which is the certificate on my PFsense Firewall. And if you have any intermediate certificate, you can copy paste it here in PEM format. And I have selected this option to avoid any sort of certificate validation failure. That's all in the basic configuration. Compatibility mode is modern. And you have various options available inside OVA reverse proxy general setting. You can enable it. It is pretty much self-explanatory for various information. For example, accelerator SSL offloader for Outlook web app. This is for the MAPI HTTP Exchange web services. So I do not have any of them. So I'll simply save this information here. So I have the proxy configured on WAN interface, which will listen on 1111 and 1112 for HTTP and HTTPS. And I have attached the certificate information as well. Now you will have to come to the web server tab and click on add. You will have to add the web server one, which is our server one, orchestra.summit.com, running at 192.168.0.248, and server 2, nas.summit.com, with an IP address 192.168.0.100. So we'll add the next web server, which is our NAS server. Peer IP is 100, port is 443, HTTPS, peer description is NAS. So now we have two web servers attached to the reverse proxy configuration. Now let's go to the mapping so that the firewall can map the request from the client to a proper web server behind the firewall LAN interface. So this is pretty important because both the domain that I have shown you in the diagram, orchestra.summit.com and nas.summit.com, resolves to 14.140.40.129. And if you do not have the proper mapping, then your request might end up landing on server 1 or server 2 incorrectly. So you should have a proper mapping on your PFSense firewall inside the proxy server configuration. Let's try to do that. So click on mappings, click on add, enable this option. You can name it as group. Let's try to do it for orchestra. This is the server 1. And select the first web server, orchestra. And you will have to specify the URL for matching condition here. So in my case, it is going to be orchestra.summit.com on HTTPS port. Well, to get more information about the URI setting, you can click on this I button and get the information on how you can select it. Well, the special characters here means the start and this means the end. So you can have the matching for the mapping. So for orchestra, I'll save it. Now we'll add for the second server, which is our NAS server. And the URI is going to be HTTPS So this is the URI for the NAS, which will then do the proper mapping to this particular server to NAS. Click on save. Verify the settings again. Orchestra set to peer orchestra, HTTPS orchestra.summit.com. Next is our NAS. Select it to peer NAS, and the URI is https nas.summit.com. Click save. Okay, so now we are good to test the configuration where we have all the basic configuration available. So now let's try to switch to the client machine, which is connected to the firewall WAN interface. So this is the client that is connected to the firewall on WAN port. Let me try to So if I do not enter any port number here, this particular request will end up, on the PFSense firewall for the WAN interface. that will then be rejected by the PFSense firewall. So you will have to specify the custom port that you have defined. In our case, it is 1112 for the HTTPS. So let's try to access this. Seems to be an issue. Let me try to figure it out. Okay, so inside the mapping, if you go here, I have not added the URI here for HTTP. Let's try to add that. So this is for the HTTP. We'll remove the S from there. Okay, so the URI for HTTP is going to be this. Let's try to save it. And similarly, the second mapping, which is for the NAS, we'll try to add that as well. And you can remove the S so that you have the proper URI matching. Save. Okay, so make sure you have the proper URI mentioned here in the mapping. Otherwise, you will end up, you know, having some sort of error on your browser when you try to access those. So make sure this match the URI exactly. And if you're putting slash here, that might again end up with some undesirable result on your client machine. So that was one of the mistake that I did. So I cleared that forward slash there. So now the mapping looks like this for orchestra and for the NAS. So these are the matching criteria for the mapping. Let's go back to our client machine. This is the client machine. Let me try to access. So I haven't initiated the capture. So this is the URI for the HTTPS for orchestra, and the proxy port is 1112. As you can see, if I check the certificate here, so you can see here, this is the common name for my proxy certificate, Squid proxy. So this is accessible. Let's try to access the second server. So the second server URI is nas.summit.com on port 1112. And again, that is also accessible. Let me try to access the HTTP version of this particular website. HTTP is running on 1111. Let me modify the URI. Let me try to access this. All right, accessible. You can see. Same thing. Let me try here. Accessible. So that's all. Let us review the captures. You can see the HTTP GET request for the orchestra.summit.com. And we can follow the HTTP stream. You can see the GET information for the host orchestra.summit.com on port 1111. Okay, so this is the login information. As you can see, orchestra.summit.com, HTTP request. Request URI, you can see here. Is 304 not modified. Let us try to check the HTTPS. Okay, so we have the request here. This is the orchestra.summit.com, which is the first server. And you can see we can follow the stream to check the SSL handshake. You can see here client hello for orchestra.summit.com and the server hello from 14.140.40.129, which is the PFsense Firewall WAN interface. So first leg of SSL communication is from the client to the PFSense firewall, and the second leg is from the PFSense firewall to the actual server. So client is unaware of the server who is fetching the details. And for the next server, which is the server 2, we can check the information. You can see here, similarly, client hello for nas.summit.com. This is the packet capture from the PFSense firewall towards the server 1, for example, on port 443, actual port. And you can see for 443, exit interface is the LAN interface 192.168.0.129, which is the LAN interface IP. This is the actual server IP for HTTPS. And if you scroll down, you can see the requests here for HTTP as well. So the first SSL handshake is from the client to the PFSense firewall, which then forwards the second leg of SSL communication from the PFSense firewall to the actual server based on the mapping that we have defined. and client will not know who is the server fetching the information. That's all in this video. Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. See you in the next one. Bye.